Charlie Allen is running barefoot and shirtless along a wooded road a few miles from campus. The tennis junkie, who was once one of the world's top-ranked online gamers, is sure that someone is after him and that neither he nor his family is safe. This dash into the night will resonate with Charlie's loved ones as the moment everything went wrong. Just a few days earlier, Charlie heads over to nearby Providence, Rhode Island to meet his younger sister Brittany. 15 months apart, the two siblings are very close and see each other often.
Charlie and I grew up together. We did everything together. We always had that connection. We would always be there for each other, We saw each other all the time.
They catch up over lunch with their mother Anne, who comes down to see her kids a couple of times a month from her home a little more than an hour-and-a-half drive north in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
That was a great day. I just remember leaving feeling happy. He was doing good in school, played tennis, and he seemed happy. And I remember driving home feeling really good.
Charlie is the oldest of 3 kids in a tight-knit family.
Very close. Charlie and I could talk about anything and everything. He told me more, sometimes things I didn't really want to know.
Was a great kid growing up. Enjoyed playing baseball and was very good at school. He enjoyed life and he did well. He was in the honor society. He could get good grades without even trying hard.
Charlie grows up hanging out with friends in the neighborhood and enjoying vacations at the family's summer house in Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Charlie had a lot of neighborhood friends, and our house was one of the gathering places.
He was just always like the light of the party. He was just very outgoing and just liked to have a good time.
He was a good guy. He seemed like, he had everything in order.
In high school, Charlie becomes interested in online gaming, competitions in which multiple players compete over the internet. He becomes especially good at the game Half-Life.
He was very determined. He would put a lot of time and effort into anything to make himself the best, and he was the best.
When Charlie first got into online gaming, he fell in love with it. He wanted to be number 1.
Charlie's gamer name is Neo, and he soon becomes one of the top-ranked Half-Life players in the world, even traveling to Texas for a tournament.
He was considered the number 1 player in the world. Standings, his stats, if you looked online, that would easily tell that.
He was very well regarded, one of the best in the world, and a lot of people knew him for that. They wrote articles about him and that kind of thing, so it was pretty impressive.
I remember in high school, and some stranger walked up to me and was like, "Are you Neo's sister?" I was like, yeah, I guess so. He's like, "I love him."
After graduating high school, Charlie enrolls at UMass Dartmouth. He majors in psychology, gets good grades. He even thinks about going on to medical school after graduation. Having conquered the online gaming world, Charlie shifts his focus to tennis when he gets to college. He approaches it with the same determination to learn and be the best.
He ended up making the college team. He would dedicate himself to something, a passion, and he would spend pretty much all his time working at that particular thing and until he felt he was mastering it.
That was all he talked about. He would study it, the strategies of the game, and he would play all the time. He would eat, sleep, and breathe tennis.
He was always a happy-go-lucky guy, always had a positive attitude.
On the courts at UMass Dartmouth, Charlie meets fellow student Mason Vio.
I had gone down there to practice. I had seen him. He had asked me to hit, so we started hitting and we got it off from there.
The two quickly bond over their mutual love of tennis.
Charlie was a quick learner. He had developed his skills pretty quickly and he had a good forehand. He liked coming to the net, and he was able to stay out there with anyone.
Charlie is fascinated when Mason tells him he trained at tennis academies in Florida, something Charlie aspires to do himself.
Charlie wanted to get a lot better. He had always said he wanted to go down south and just train to see how good he could get.
At 2 o'clock on Thursday, October 11th, 2007, Charlie and Mason meet on the courts to practice.
We had practiced for 2.5 hours, just playing a little bit and just doing some drills. Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. We had a great practice.
Charlie tells Mason that he has been invited to a party later that evening by a member of the girls' tennis team. He asks Mason to join him.
He was really excited about the party, the chance to go talk to girls on the tennis team and just to have a good time. Charlie was really excited and was happy that we were both going to go.
The two friends grab dinner at the school cafeteria and then go their separate ways to shower and clean up. They agree to meet back on campus at 8:30 and go to the party together. Around 6 p.m., Mason heads to his house, nearly a half hour away. Mason assumes Charlie is headed to his off-campus apartment in nearby New Bedford.
I told Charlie that I would see him later tonight and the party should be good, and I will give you a call when I get back.
At 8 o'clock that night, at her apartment in Providence, Charlie's sister Brittany is checking her Facebook account.
We talk to each other on Facebook every day. He loved Facebook.
Charlie had messaged her earlier that evening, and she wanted to get back to him. But when she logs on, she is shocked at what she finds. Coming up, in a matter of moments, Charlie's world appears to unravel.
I could hear over the phone, his heart dropping. He got really scared.
His friends and family for his passion for tennis. 22-year-old Charlie Allen Jr. is finishing up his senior year of college. October 11th, 2007. His sister Brittany logs onto Facebook to respond to a message Charlie sent her earlier. She is thrown by what she discovers.
His account was deleted. He didn't exist on there anymore. And so I thought it was crazy that all of a sudden he would delete it and he wouldn't even tell me.
Brittany calls Charlie to find out what happened.
At first I was just like, hey, what are you doing? And he was like, I'm walking, just thinking about going to this girl's party. I was like, okay, well, called because I was wondering, why did you delete your Facebook? And I could just hear over the phone him, his heart dropping. It was all of a sudden, he got really scared.
Brittany is confused when Charlie tells her he has no idea what happened to his Facebook page and that he didn't delete it.
And then he just started panicking. He's talking really fast, just in a panic.
What Charlie tells her next is stunning.
There are people after him, and he's not safe, and I'm not safe. It's you have to leave school right now. You have to go home, stay with Dad. Dad's the only one who can protect you. There are really important people after me. I've sent some emails, and I'm not safe. Right before he hung up, he said, all the answers are in the periodic table of elements.
Distraught and bewildered, Brittany calls her father.
I was really freaked out, and I called my dad crying, and I was like, I don't know what's going on, but Charlie scared me.
Brittany had been very close to Charlie, but with the way that he was talking to her, she was very concerned about his well-being. And at the same time, my wife and I both had received cell phone messages from Charlie where he sounded like he was running and talking about maybe heading south. It was definitely concerning.
In the message Charlie leaves for his father, he mentions Mexico and Florida. In the voicemail he leaves for his mother, he talks of Texas.
I had a message from Charlie, which was really out of character of him. He had told me that he needs to be loved more and that he felt isolated. He was running at the time that he was talking to me. He was out of breath. Then he kind of hung up abruptly. And I tried calling him back, and he had turned off his cell phone.
Charlie's parents and sister all try to reach him on his cell phone, but every call goes to voicemail. That same evening, on the UMass Dartmouth campus, Mason heads to the campus parking lot where he and Charlie are meeting to go to the party together. But Charlie never shows.
I'd waited about a half an hour to 45 minutes before I had left. I figured Charlie probably went to the party and just forgot about me.
Mason tries one more time to reach Charlie. He gets voicemail and heads home. Meanwhile, Charlie's mother, father, and sister keep trying, but fail to reach him.
Charlie had taken off a couple of times, usually just to go see a tennis tournament. He'd always get in touch with us the same day or the next day, and so we figured he'd turn up the next day.
But Charlie doesn't turn up, and he doesn't call. His parents notify the university that Charlie has vanished. October 14th, 2007. 3 days after Charlie is last seen, police are called to investigate something suspicious a homeowner found in his backyard. Detective Robert Levinson of the Dartmouth Police Department is the patrolman on duty.
On Sunday, October 14th, at around 11 o'clock in the morning, I was dispatched to a residence in town for some found property. Specifically, it was a backpack, a school-type backpack.
Levinson looks through the backpack and finds a notebook.
The name in the notebook was Charles Allen. I contacted the university campus, and from there I found out that Charles Allen Jr. had been reported missing.
Bloodhound units are sent out to see what, if any, trace they can find of the college student. The canine search comes up empty, but over at UMass Dartmouth, campus police make a discovery. They find Charlie's Ford Expedition in a school parking lot. Inside the car is a pillow and blanket.
It appeared as if that maybe Charlie had been sleeping in his vehicle rather than in his home.
Up to this point, Charlie's family has assumed they would hear from him at any moment. But their concern turns to fear with the discovery of Charlie's car.
When they found his car, that's when I couldn't deal with it because why would he leave his car?
Monday, October 15th, the day after the car and backpack are discovered. Officer Levinson is talking about the case with a fellow cop. When he describes Charlie, his colleague tells him that the college student sounds just like a suspect in another case.
There had actually been a house break not too far away from the campus.
In the early morning hours of Friday, October 12th, a little more than 6 hours after Brittany last spoke to her brother, Jean Boudreau wakes to find someone with no shirt on climbing through her second-floor bedroom window.
When she awoke, she had a brief conversation with this gentleman who had entered her window.
And he says, "Oh, excuse me, ma'am, I'm just leaving." He was looking for his friend Mason, and then he just proceeded to go out the window. He was actually very polite.
Levinson is sure it's Charlie. The physical description is a match, and he has already learned that Charlie has a friend named Mason.
Just based on the physical description and the clothing description of the person who entered this resident's home, that person was more than likely Charlie Allen.
This discovery only intensifies the mystery. Charlie's tennis buddy lives nowhere near the home that was broken into.
It was a good 30 minutes away, and he had known where I lived, so I thought that was a little strange.
Just didn't make any sense to me.
Coming up, the search for Charlie becomes more urgent.
Time was of the essence to find him before he had hurt himself or something even worse.
Charlie Allen Jr. leaves a series of worrisome messages on his parents' cell phone, and after a disturbing conversation with his sister, he disappears. When investigators seemingly tie the 22-year-old to a break-in at a home several miles from Charlie's UMass campus, the case becomes even more puzzling.
Charlie was not a known criminal. This wasn't his normal behavior to break into someone's house.
But police learned something about Charlie that they think may explain this behavior.
The father told me that his son was bipolar and manic depressive, and he had acted irrational at times, and he might not have been taking his medication as he was supposed to. So it would all make sense that he was in some type of manic state, and he was acting irrational.
Years earlier in high school, Charlie was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition that involves alternating periods of mania and depression.
He became a bit manic, and was a pretty big change for him. He had been somewhat shy in school up to that point, and suddenly he was very outgoing, and it was noticeable. When he was manic, he talked a lot and fast, and he had somewhat grandiose thoughts. When he was diagnosed in high school, he took medication for some period of time and started seeing a therapist and seemed to do better. He finished high school, graduated, and it went well when he went to college.
But in recent years, Charlie had an on-again, off-again relationship with his psychiatric medication.
When they diagnosed him with bipolar disorder and they put him on, mood stabilizers, he said he wasn't the same. He felt, dead inside. He didn't get happy or sad. I remember one time I was so upset about something, hysterically crying to him about it, and he looked at me and he was like, "I'm just jealous that you can feel like that, feel passionately about something, even if it's bad," because he didn't.
The summer before he disappeared, Charlie stops taking the drugs altogether.
Eventually, he stopped taking the medication on his own. Things had leveled out. He tried to maintain his physical well-being in relationship to his mental well-being, and he seemed like he was somewhat under control doing it that way.
He was like, I wasn't alive before. I feel like I'm living for the first time.
Police suspect Charlie's disappearance is connected to his bipolar disorder, and that off his medication, he may have slipped into a manic state.
We believed that we were dealing with a mentally ill individual, and time was of the essence to find him before he had hurt himself or something even worse.
But the people who know Charlie best, his family and friends, find it impossible to believe that Charlie's condition is serious enough to make him want to disappear.
People don't understand, mental illness, what people call mental illness. And once they hear that label, it's like, oh, he probably just ran away, or he's probably schizophrenic. He has no idea. He's just crazy. I think he's more sane than anyone I've ever met.
Even when Charlie was manic, he always made sense. He never lost his touch with reality.
Charlie's mother, who saw him just days before he disappeared, says there would usually be a build-up to a manic episode, and during her recent visit with her son, there was no evidence of that at all.
It starts off slow and it builds and it's built and it's built. That's the way it was with Charlie. You just don't lose your mind in 1 minute and run away.
There were no signs indicating that he was going to have a breakdown of any kind, so it all seemed a little strange to me.
In fact, Mason, who saw Charlie several times a week, had no idea his friend was bipolar.
That was news to me because he had always been really level-headed, happy-go-lucky, and hung out with him a lot. There was nothing to suggest that he was depressed or bipolar at all.
But in hindsight, Mason does remember something a little odd from the last day he saw Charlie.
At dinner time, Charlie and I went to the school cafeteria, and when we had sat down, he reached across to grab pizza from my plate. I thought that was a little strange. I had mentioned it, and he said he thought that it was his slice of pizza. We both kind of laughed it off.
In another strange twist, police also learned that shortly before he disappeared, Charlie legally changed his name from Charles Allen Jr. to Neo Babson Maximus.
One day, I got home from work, and he's like, check this out. I changed my name. And he took out his license, and he showed it to me, and it said, Neo Babson Maximus. And I just laughed. I was like, you serious? What the hell is this? I just kind of brushed it aside, when I'm still calling you Charlie. I'm not calling you Neo in the public.
Neo, Charlie's online gaming name, is taken from the movie The Matrix, while Maximus comes from the film Gladiator. Babson is a family name.
I asked him why, and he wanted it to be different. And he wanted to be the best tennis player in the world. That was his goal. And he thought that it'd sound a lot better if he had a different name.
Charlie didn't talk widely of the name change. In fact, many are later surprised to find out about it.
Charlie had never mentioned anything about changing his name. I did not know Charlie had changed his name until after he had gone missing.
Police see the name change as further evidence of Charlie's troubled state of mind.
I don't know what makes a person decide to change their name. Not only do we have a person that's missing, we have an individual that legally changed his name. And perhaps, did he do that to escape his past, to start a new life? Maybe, I don't know. I guess there's so many possible answers out there.
Charlie's family last heard from him on a Thursday. A week later, there is still no word.
I just felt like he'll call tomorrow. It would just be too unbearable to think otherwise.
His parents think back to the baffling voicemails he left each of them just before his disappearance, talking about heading south. His last conversation with his sister Brittany is equally confusing. Charlie told Brittany that people were after him and he wasn't safe, but none of his friends were aware of any danger he may have been facing or any enemies he may have had.
Charlie didn't have any enemies. He was just a happy guy and was everyone's friend, so for him to have enemies was a little far-fetched, it seemed.
The kid wasn't really a troublesome kid. He never picked fights. He wasn't a mean person. I don't know why he said that.
Police don't find any evidence to indicate that anyone is after Charlie or that he had been in danger. But Charlie's mother and sister don't believe Charlie's fears are imaginary.
I didn't think that there was any chance in hell that he was just having an illusion that there were people after him. I could tell that he was being honest. He was really scared, and I believe it.
Coming up, could Charlie have hitched a ride out of town?
I feel confident that it was that student.
Charlie Allen Jr. is last seen in early October 2007. The college student suffers from bipolar disorder, and police seemingly link him to a home break-in. Law enforcement devotes every resource available to search around the UMass Dartmouth campus and in neighboring New Bedford.
I think the fact that Charlie did suffer from some type of mental illness made it all the more urgent to search the woods and to reach out to as many people who knew Charlie and that maybe had seen him within the last few days before he disappeared.
Police find Charlie's sneakers along a road not far from the house he allegedly broke into, which seems to confirm their suspicion that he was the shirtless intruder.
The search escalated from the use of Massachusetts State Police helicopter to a widespread search with multiple people searching for Charlie in the wooded area. It's a very dense wooded area in that part of Dartmouth.
Now, with no shirt, no shoes, and wearing just a pair of warm-up pants, how far could the college student have made it in the cool, rainy October weather?
If anybody could figure out a way to survive, it would be Charlie. He knew how to take care of himself, and so he was definitely the type of person that would find a way if he wanted to.
When Charlie's family reports that he had a very active online life, police check Charlie's computer for possible clues to his whereabouts.
There was nothing really all that helpful on his computer that would lead us in a different direction. The detective who checked the computer did not report anything out of the ordinary.
The only finding of interest is that one of the last pages Charlie looked at online was a website for the University of Texas. In the voicemail he left for his mother, he mentioned going to Texas. Had Charlie been researching a secret move south?
We contacted the university down there and just to inquire whether Charlie had in fact applied at that university, and we were told that no, there was no file with his name attached to it.
If Charlie had an interest in going to Texas, he would tell me. Because he knows I would say, if you want to do that, do it.
Charlie's mother is more concerned with what police didn't find on his computer. Charlie had told his sister he was in trouble because he had sent some emails to important people, but those emails are nowhere to be found. In fact, all of Charlie's recent emails are missing.
There were no emails before he went missing. There were no emails from October 11, 10th, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. But I just thought it was really strange.
Blows my mind that we could give Charlie's computer to the police to do the forensics, and someone who lived his entire life on the computer. They found nothing. He, lived a virtual life, and they found nothing.
If there is any truth to the notion that someone was after Charlie, could they have tampered with his computer and purposely wiped it clean? Or could it have been Charlie himself who did it? Could the online phenom have intended to take himself off the grid?
If he wanted to change his identity, I'm pretty sure he could have done it. I mean, he's pretty creative in, the terms of being able to, act, and be something, different. He did change his name, so I guess, in a sense, his identity was kind of altered already.
According to his friends and family, Charlie had a knack for mastering things quickly. Could he have been equally adept at setting up his own disappearance? Was changing his name a first step in creating a new identity? Charlie's family has a hard time believing this could be true.
People would say to me, maybe he just doesn't want to be found. Maybe he wanted to go off like that. And I'm like, well, you don't know him. He would never want to do that. He was going to go to med school. He wanted to be a doctor. He was so happy where he was at the time with what he was doing. And he had goals for the future. He loved his apartment. He loved his classes. He loved playing tennis. And then all of a sudden, it's all, gone.
Charlie has been missing for more than a week. With no news concerning his whereabouts, his family is getting increasingly desperate.
We couldn't sleep, trouble eating, crying all day. It was just unimaginable. It actually was just, difficult to function. every second of every day you'd be thinking about it. And it's just totally unimaginable.
Did Charlie flee in a manic state brought on by bipolar disorder? Did he decide to create a new identity someplace else? Or, as he told his sister, were people really after him?
There are numerous scenarios as to what could have happened to Charlie Allen. He was in our town. Someone had seen him. Someone had interacted with him. After that, it's anyone's guess what happened.
Finally, a few weeks after Charlie is last seen, a witness comes forward. Jim Costa is an electric company troubleshooter. On a Saturday morning in October 2007, he leaves early for work.
Driving down Cross Road, I did notice a young man, no shirt on, and he looked rather disheveled. He looked shaken. He didn't look that good. And I saw that young man walking towards a truck, maybe to ask for help, or maybe he was slept in that truck. I didn't know.
While the young man sounds like he could be Charlie, Costa is not able to remember exactly when he saw him, the Saturday just days after Charlie disappeared, or the Saturday a week later.
If it was the right day, I feel confident that it was that student.
The intersection is near the UMass Dartmouth campus. It is also along Route 6, a major thoroughfare that feeds right onto Interstate 195.
We haven't been able to confirm if that was in fact Charlie.
But if it was, what happened? Did he approach the truck driver for help or a ride?
It's possible he could have gotten on the truck and left the area. That opens up a whole new door for us, or for the family. It gives us hope that maybe Charlie is alive.
December 2007. Charlie has been missing for more than 2 months, and the trail is growing cold.
After a certain time frame in any investigation, after a couple of searches had been conducted, the phone stopped ringing. The leads just weren't coming in. We sort of hit a wall in the investigation.
It just became more excruciating. Anxiety increased tenfold every day with nothing being found.
While Charlie's shoes and backpack were quickly located, there is no sign of his cell phone or his wallet. His father keeps Charlie's bank and cell phone accounts active, just in case.
The bank card was never used after he had disappeared, and actually the cell phone itself, I still have the account active, just in case. Every time the phone rang here at home, it would be your heart would jump. You think it's him or somebody calling about him. Every time, you hear a car pull up or somebody come to the door, you think it could be him.
For about 5 or 6 months, I called him every single day, multiple times. I leave him voicemails and stuff to the point where you couldn't leave him voicemails anymore. The phone would just keep ringing or it would just hang up on you.
Charlie's family prays for answers, but as the days wear on, they are left with only questions. Where is he? What happened to him, and why hasn't he called? It is impossible for them to believe that Charlie has intentionally cut them off. But it is even more horrifying to imagine that he may have done so against his will.
So, it's just like you're suspended. Sometimes I pray for answers and then I think, oh wait, is that really what I want? What if, he's dead, but it still eats away at you, You can't find peace unless you...
Coming up, a group of private investigators and a fresh search offer new and disturbing leads in the case.
When we got the call, our hearts just dropped.
The disappearance of 22-year-old college student Charlie Allen Jr. devastates his family and confounds police.
It's very frustrating. Is it possible he's out there and doesn't really remember who he is? I don't know. I personally would like to believe that he's alive and he's out there somewhere.
Several months after Charlie's disappearance, his family is dismayed by the lack of movement in the investigation. They reach out to a private investigator, John Lassise.
Charlie Allen Sr. contacted me, and they were just devastated that they hadn't been able to locate him. Described him as very intelligent, loved his family, and they knew that he was off his medication. He was manic, and he believed that he was being stalked. People were after him, his family.
Lassise takes on the case pro bono and forms a cold case team with several other PIs to help. They start by considering the area where Charlie was last seen and weighing whether or not he could still be somewhere in the vicinity.
Could he be in the woods? Absolutely. He may have committed suicide. He may have fallen into foul play. It's all a possibility.
first order of business is to organize a new and comprehensive search of the 4 square mile area bordering UMass Dartmouth. The terrain is dense and difficult to navigate. Alive or dead, if Charlie is in the woods, Lassise is confident that they'll find him. Police have already explored the area, but Lassise and his partners plan a much larger and deeper search, employing ground searchers, ATVs, helicopters, canine units, and cadaver dogs. More than 300 people take part, and the massive effort kicks off on the year anniversary of Charlie's disappearance.
This search is the largest civilian-run search that we're aware of in New England.
Private investigator Alan Tate coordinates the search. As guides, he uses Charlie's last known location, as well as where his shoes and backpack were found.
To search this area here, although on the map it looks nice, wide, and open, on the ground it's very thick and very difficult for ground searchers to navigate through.
Charlie's friend Anthony is one of the many volunteer searchers.
I was kind of hoping we'd find anything, because obviously who wants to, you want closure sometimes, but at the same time, I'm the type where I don't want to give up, so it's like I don't want an ending that's not positive.
But on the third day of the search, a team including Charlie's own cousin comes across some bones.
When we got the call, our hearts just dropped. Obviously, after that period of time, it's almost like you might expect it's going to happen, that they would find him. So it was, your hearts drop, but you feel like this is finally it.
For 24 hours, we didn't know if they were his bones. That's not a fun situation to be in.
When they found the bones, I couldn't even describe to you what that feels like. We just pretty much died.
But the bones turn out to be animal, not human remains.
It was difficult to do the search, but it was something that was necessary to do. We knew it needed to be done, and in my opinion, the outcome was good. That he wasn't found.
I was just exhilarated that they didn't find anything.
I don't believe that Charlie is in the woods. I believe, at this point, that Charlie made it out.
But where did he go? While the search indicates that it is unlikely Charlie or his body is in the woods, it still offers no clues to what happened to the college student.
There's so many different ways you can look at it. I personally am trying to remain positive. I'd like to think that he's out there somewhere and he's still alive. I think that if Charlie had passed away, I think we would have come across him by now.
The only place to go with this investigation right now is to assume that he is alive and see if we can find him.
As the months pass, there is no word from Charlie and no sign of him anywhere. The investigation appears to have hit a dead end, but his friends remain hopeful.
I feel like wherever he wanted to go, he had a plan. And if the plan didn't work out, 100% the way he wanted it to, the way he thinks, he would have a backup plan. He would have ways of getting by if stuff didn't go the way he wanted it to go.
I think Charlie wandered off. I think he probably is somewhere down south playing tennis like he wanted to.
December 2009. More than 2 years since Charlie disappeared, there's a possible sighting of him much closer to home.
It was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was sleeping.
Stephen Kelly and his wife are asleep in bed in their New Bedford, Massachusetts home, 11 miles from the UMass Dartmouth campus.
I heard the door knock. So, I ran to the door, and I opened the door, and there was a young man standing at the door. Wasn't dressed for the weather. He shouldn't have been outside at 4 o'clock in the morning. He said he needed help getting back to SMU.
SMU stands for Southeastern Massachusetts University, what UMass Dartmouth was called until 1991.
My wife was panicking. She thought that it was maybe going to be like home invasion if I went outside. So we shut the door and called the police.
But by the time police get there, the young man is nowhere to be found. The next day, Kelly's wife mentions the incident to a friend, who tells her about Charlie's disappearance. When Kelly hears about it, he looks up pictures of the UMass student online.
When I looked at the pictures, I'm like, that's the kid that was standing at our front door.
Could it have been Charlie Allen? Kelly tells police he thinks it was.
He said close to 100%, which is very high for someone to, make that type of a statement. But, I believe in his mind that, he really felt that he saw Charlie. It brings sort of a new element to this whole investigation. When I think about it sometimes, I think it's such an odd story that sometimes you almost wonder, if it's real or not.
It would be a wonderful movie of the week if Charlie shows up some morning on the doorstep of his parents and asks if he can come home. So that's my hope.
Charlie's information and fingerprints are entered into the National Crime Information Center database.
In the future, if Charlie is placed under arrest or protective custody, and if his fingerprints are checked, it will show that he's a missing person.
To date, there have been no hits.
In my time here as a police officer, we've never encountered a story such as this. So we just want answers. I know the family wants it. I know all the investigators. We just want to know. We want to know what happened to Charlie Allen Jr. All we ask for is some closure, I think. That's what the family deserves, at least. He's still out there, somewhere.
Charlie's family continues to hope that Charlie is safe and that they will one day hear from him.
Charlie would never just disappear. And he knows me well enough, and his family, to know that how much it would hurt. I have no idea where he is or if he's alive. It's like the ultimate internal.
Yesterday, I believe that love was here to stay. Tell me where I've gone astray.
I can't begin to imagine what was going on in her head.
Brought up in poverty, Ruth Ellis fought her way to a life mixing with the elite of 1950s London. This was where she met driver David Blakely.
He was delightful, he was charming.
The man she loved, the man who would abuse her.
David gave me a black eye.
And the man she would kill.
Ruth Ellis sentenced to death in accordance with the law.
He tried desperately hard to make her say in front of the jury that she didn't intend to kill the man.
She was the last woman to be hanged in Britain.
She came to me as though she was just walking the other way, walked right to me. She just puckered her lips so she was trying to smile, She's a brave woman.
7 decades on, the controversy and the tragic drama of her story still has the power to captivate.
This role is definitely heavier than any other role. I'm really surprised by the way that I'm so emotionally affected by it.
But the mother of two deserved to be sent to the gallows.
She'd endured such a huge amount of physical and emotional abuse by the time that she turned up at the Magdala that Easter Sunday.
2 lives that didn't make it to 30. And one of them didn't deserve it, and the other shouldn't have done it.
She accepted her fate.
My tablet's all over and done with anyway. I'll be your sunshine if you say you'll be mine, and we'll spend our days together. In any kind of weather, there'll be blue skies above. I'll be a moonbeam if you say a true dream, and we'll.
The 1950s were an incredibly narrow time to be a woman. You were really pushed into 2 roles. The prime role was that of the happy housewife. There was the other role, which was more the one that Ruth was pushed into.
Ruth's life was as far from that of a 1950s housewife as you could get. By 26, she was the manager of an exclusive Knightsbridge nightclub. The little club was owned by Maury Conley, one of London's most notorious gangsters and pimps.
And he certainly had a lot of connections to the underworld in London at the time, which was thriving.
She had fallen into a world, the world of Clubland, which for many people would have been disreputable and something that a decent girl didn't do, and was described as a nightclub hostess, a synonym for prostitute.
She won his trust. She really knew what she was good at, and she was obviously a very good people person. She was ahead of her time.
All that we dream of.
Ruth was born in Rhyl, North Wales, in 1926, the 5th of 6 children. Her father, Arthur Hornby, was a musician, and her mother, Bertha, was a Belgian Jewish refugee. When cinemas switched to talkies, Arthur lost his job, plunging the family into extreme poverty. They moved to London, but home life was harsh and violent.
I think life must have been really hard for Ruth as a young girl, because she was being constantly moved about from school to school. Ruth's father was very abusive to her mother, and he eventually became abusive towards his children, especially his daughters.
Her childhood was pretty shambolic, but I think the big thing that sort of ran through her life was that she was incredibly independent and she was determined to make something of herself.
At the height of the war, aged just 16, she fell in love with a Canadian airman. When she got pregnant, he promised to marry her.
She got pregnant and had a baby outside of marriage, a source of great shame at that time. Having an illegitimate child was really problematic.
9 months after giving birth to her son Andre, she'd been abandoned. The man she thought she loved already had a family back in Quebec. By the end of the war, Ruth was working as a waitress in central London. She was determined to become self-sufficient, to make a proper life for herself and her son.
She was chasing the bright lights of London, and she wanted to be a superstar. She was also a very good-looking lady who had a lot of character.
Ruth got work as a model and as a hostess in a Mayfair nightclub. She was earning £5 per week, plus drinks commission, more money than she had ever made before.
Good evening. Welcome. Wonderful. Thank you. Vicky, what do you think? Bloody gorgeous. Hello, Coach. Champagne? No, please.
But Ruth was desperate for stability, and hostessing would never give her that. In 1950, the now 24-year-old married one of her regulars. George Ellis was a dentist, 17 years her senior.
I don't think she was mad keen on him when she first met him. He, I think, effectively wore her down.
You know, one of the things that attracted her to George was the fact that he was a professional. He was a professional man. His social status was higher than that of her own.
Ruth left London for Southampton to give herself and her son a better life. It was not to be. George was a chronic alcoholic.
And from the off, it wasn't good. He was very jealous of her, she was quite jealous of him, and he was drinking incredibly heavily. It was just a terrible relationship from then on that got even worse because he became more and more violent.
In the spring of 1951, Ruth appeared in the film Lady Godiva Rides Again alongside Joan Collins. She was 4 months pregnant, and her marriage was on the rocks. By October, they'd separated. Ruth was back in London with Andre and her new baby daughter, Georgina.
The relationship Ruth had with George Ellis was completely and utterly toxic. There was no saving it.
Ruth had to return to her life as a hostess to support herself and her children. Then in 1953, Conley made Ruth the manager of the Little Club in Kensington.
That was a place where men frequented and had alcohol, and naturally most of the relationships were formed on the premise of a similarity or a love of drink, smoke, music, and a good time.
The job came with a large rent-free flat above the club. Now her family had a home, and she finally had the financial independence she craved.
And I think Ruth definitely saw that as a potential avenue to help her and her children, have more comfort and security.
But that success and stability would be short-lived. Within a year, she'd met David Blakely, the man who'd bring her world crashing down.
Can I buy you a drink?
Here on this, Mr. Blakely. Let me get you one.
Things were good for Ruth. She was the youngest club manageress in London. She had her own apartment. She was earning really well. She was looking after her kids. Considering the background that she had, it was when David really came to her life that things started to unravel.
David Blakely was a former public schoolboy who wanted to be a motor racing champion.
This is a 70-year-old racing suit that my uncle David wore. These are David's trophies from racing at Silverstone. And here, DM Blakely number 593, the St. John's Horsefall meeting, Silverstone, July 1951. So he's just 22 years old, and he's coming in second at Silverstone. Incredibly dapper. A guy I not only looked up to, but was charming, fun, funny, caring.
David Blakely grew up in Sheffield. When he was a teenager, his family life was shattered when his father, a Scottish doctor, was accused of murdering his pregnant lover.
David's father, Dr. Blakely, found himself on a murder charge because this young woman and her child both died. And he was accused basically of killing them both, giving her some sort of medication that would bring on a miscarriage, but which so in such a brutal way that the young woman ended up losing her life too.
After a trial, Dr. Blakely was acquitted and returned to being a GP. David's parents divorced. His mother married Humphrey Cook, one of Britain's wealthiest men, and David went to live in Cook's country estate.
I would spend the summers at the house in Penn in Buckinghamshire, and that was how I got to know David. I'd have fond memories of sitting in David's car and bouncing around the outrageous country roads in his 1946 MG.
Look, we call it the Emperor. This car is going to make my name. You don't believe me?
Ruth was 26 and David 24 when they met.
She saw a handsome, dashing, elegant young man who was different from other people she had known.
Ruth saw a more vulnerable side to David, beyond the charming and dapper racing driver.
It wasn't all sexually driven. From Ruth's perspective, she felt as though that she could help him. She could see he was extremely vulnerable, even though he had this facade of confidence.
This is Clyde Gunnell and Anthony Finlater. Hello. Ant's been working on the car with me. Well, he's the money and I'm the brains. Hello. And this is Carol Finlater. Carol, Ruth Ellis. Ruth works at the Little Club.
You know, manages it, actually. We brought champagne.
Oh, let's crack it open, shall we?
Unfortunately, Ant and Carol were snobs, really. They made it quite clear that they thought she was beneath them and very much beneath David too. No matter how lovely she was, they really couldn't really understand what David saw in her.
Despite being looked down on by his friends, Ruth and David became firm fixtures of the Chelsea and Kensington party scene. They seemed infatuated. He moved in with her and her children within a few weeks of meeting.
She was a really fun person to be around. She was always the person who would start a party, the last person to end a party. But having said that, the things that he kind of fell for with Ruth are the things that in the end he hated.
Ruth was given a tape recorder as a gift, and for the last months of her life, she recorded herself and David.
You're one of the biggest bodyguards I've ever met in my life. You've got that on record. Can I ring up one or two of your boyfriends, Mrs. Ellis?
David particularly disliked one of Ruth's admirers, Desmond Cusson, a former RAF pilot turned company director.
Desmond Cusson was strongly infatuated with Ruth, which really annoyed David Blakely. And so there was this love triangle, if you like, which is always doomed for disaster.
In May 1954, George Ellis filed for divorce. He accused Ruth of being an unfit mother and pressured her to allow a childless couple he knew to foster their daughter.
George Ellis hated the idea of his daughter living above a nightclub, saying he had a solution. Ruth didn't want to, so she clearly did have love for her daughter, but eventually there was an element of Ruth wanting something better for Georgina.
Ruth finally agreed. Georgina went to live with her father's friends in Cheshire, 200 miles away.
She didn't want to give Georgina up. I think she probably found it hard having a younger child around the house with the lifestyle that she was leading.
By that time, David was spending less and less time at home, putting his effort and money into his racing car, the Emperor.
He was working 18-hour days on this car, so he had found his direction. And as many of us had, when you find something that you love and you're so devoted to, that changes your life.
David spent most of the year away racing. In June, he was at Le Mans with the Bristol racing team. While he was gone, Desmond Cussum tried to break him and Ruth apart.
When David was away on race circuits, Desmond would have done his damnedest to spread as much ill will or ill feelings about Uncle David.
In London, Ruth throws a surprise party for David's 25th birthday.
Surprise! Oh, I'm so sorry, darling. David asked me to let you know he can't make it. Look, David's engaged to be married to Mary Dawson. He's been living here with me for months. You've been a lovely friend to him. Bless you.
That evening, Ruth invites Desmond Cussum to her flat and her bed.
She was furious. She was upset. So what she did, in revenge, was she slept with a man she knew David did not like.
David broke off his engagement and returned to London. Once again, Ruth believed they could have a happy future together. But the relationship came at a huge emotional and financial cost for Ruth. David continued having affairs, all the while living off her money.
Who wants him anyway? Pennis Boston. There are cheap skates and cheap skates. And I think I have met the cheapest of skates, don't you? Oh. He really is the lowest of the low. He's just a little skunk.
Things were about to get much worse.
I wondered if I might get an advance on my wages.
Been sponging again, is he? I'm gonna have to start charging you rent on the flat.
You can't do that.
As their relationship deteriorated, it became more violent.
The intensity of all of that passion and love was equal to then the intensity of violence in that relationship, so which then segued into this mental violence and mental abuse.
The physical abuse often left Ruth covered in bruises, though she would try to defend herself.
There are many instances where she took a good hiding. I know she was small in stature, but I think she threw a few punches back.
Those who knew David couldn't imagine him capable of such physical violence.
There are a lot of people of that age who do stupid things. But to the degree that he's been painted as such a monster, it's just hard to imagine.
Fed up with David's freeloading, Connie sacked Ruth, throwing her out of the flat. Desmond took her and Andre in.
This is Ruth Ellis saying Happy Christmas everyone, and may Ruth have a neat coat in the New Year. And may Desmond have all he wishes himself in the New Year.
Ruth now had no job, no money, and no home of her own. But despite everything, she and David couldn't stay away from each other, even though his violence was escalating.
Oh, shut up. I have a black eye. And David gave me a black eye. Sitting in the car park on New Year's night in Penn Buckinghamshire at the Crown Hotel.
I think it was when you're in the center of that storm, it's really hard to see the full picture and the full perspective. And so it was playing it with that in mind and playing it that close to the flame.
I'm awfully afraid I'm falling in love with you.
No, seriously, Des, all joking aside, I think I've been a fool. I've been living with that drip for 18 months now, can you imagine it?
Ruth and Andre, her son, were now living with Desmond after she lost job and home because of her relationship with David. Desmond hoped this would lead to him and Ruth becoming closer.
The only saving grace from her perspective at the time was Andre. and Desmond's promises around, how he would help Andre.
In February 1955, Ruth told Desmond she wanted to get her own flat. Desmond lent Ruth the deposit, unaware it would become a love nest for her and David.
Must have been difficult for you.
Well, it was sort of always the question that their association would discontinue. And I was prepared to put up with it, I think, at the time, in the hopes that it would.
There was an element of him being genuine and genuinely caring about her, wanting to protect her. But the other was also around this sense of jealousy that why can't she see that a world with me is, far more safe and secure?
But whatever Desmond Cousin was hoping for, it wasn't happening. Ruth was now 2 months pregnant with David's baby.
It was one thing for him to use her as a sexual object, but for him to even consider a child with her would have been deeply inappropriate. Of the circles that he moved in, this is not on. I'm sure that gave expression in the violence that he used against her.
David, I'm pregnant. I swear. He punched her in her stomach. She lost the baby. The impact of that psychologically on Ruth, you can't even imagine it, I don't think. And that was really the beginning of the end.
She was miscarrying, obviously the hormones, the emotions that come with that.
Ruth was devastated. She was struggling physically and emotionally. Then, just a few days after the miscarriage, David told her he loved her again.
The side of his behaviour that became mental abuse, of his disappearance and return, so the constant anticipation of his return, I think psychologically impacts someone so that you can't find any stability in your sanity or physically either. And I think that could drive a person quite mad.
With promises of being a changed man, David said he'd be at Ruth's flat by 8 p.m. to spend the weekend with her. He didn't show, having already told his family he'd ended the relationship.
There's no doubt that he believed he had ended it, that he didn't want to go back, and he was seeking the advice and solace and company of two of his best friends.
Finlayter's residence? Is David there? No.
Hello?
And who was that girl?
Look, David isn't here, all right?
She thought she heard David in the house, and she thought he was probably with the nanny. She was really, really just distraught.
Ruth called the Findlaters twice more, then asked Desmond to drive her there. When they arrived, David's car was parked outside.
You threw her at him. David! David! Left you, Ruth. You won't see him ever again. You're lying. I have only ever told you the truth. You've never wanted to hear it. You can't just walk away when everything is ruined. She said, he's let me down. He's let my son down. He promised he would do this. I've paid for everything. I've lost everything. I'm entitled to show my anger. That anger was building, that quiet anger that she felt. She just couldn't see a way out.
Over the Easter weekend, Desmond drove Ruth between the Findlaters in North London and Buckinghamshire several times looking for David.
I just wish he was dead. I wish he was dead. I wish he would jump in a lake and drown and I could just be free.
It is now believed that Desmond gave Ruth a gun and taught her how to shoot it. Her son, Andre, later remembers seeing the weapon. Desmond took Ruth to her flat, where she put her son to bed. It's thought he then drove her back to the Findlaters and left her there. As David's car wasn't to be seen, she walked to the nearby Magdala pub.
On the Easter Sunday evening, Ruth came down from Tanzer Road behind me, and she knew that David and Clive had gone into this pub here, the Magdala, to get some more supplies for their party. She was looking through the window here.
2 packs of cigarettes. Come on, because we're having a party around the corner. Leave the poor girl alone.
David and Clive came out of the door there. Clive went across to the passenger door. Ruth shouted to David, "David!" He tried to ignore her.
Ruth, what are you...
And she fired at him. She fired 2 more shots.
Bullets puncture several of David's major organs. He died within minutes.
And while he collapsed on the pavement completely, she brought the gun up to her temple and brought it right up, and her hands started to shake. It was a very, very brutal shooting. It did come across as being so cold-blooded. She was so focused on what she wanted to do, what she felt she had to do.
Ruth was arrested and taken to Hampstead Police Station, where she confessed to killing David. Her solicitor was this man, John Bickford, who spoke about the case 20 years later.
On the face of it, the phrase an open and shut case is virtually irresistible.
It looked like it. That was why the police didn't bother too much to trace the story about the gun. Originally.
He was always very kind and considerate, very focused, very, very keen on getting the facts before he made any decisions.
Ruth told the police she was given the gun by a customer at her club years earlier, insisting no one else was involved. Then asked Bickford to tell Desmond that she'd forgotten to mention the gun had come from a customer.
He said, well, the truth is that I, in fact, gave her the gun, but the police don't know that. And on her own insistence, he cleaned the gun, oiled it, cleaned all the bullets, put them in the gun, and then they went in the car together with the gun, with the loaded gun, in search of Blakely.
In his statement to the police, Desmond said he had never seen Ruth with the gun and didn't know where it came from. It was the story he stuck to for the rest of his life.
Let me state quite clearly, I did not give Ruth the gun, nor on that occasion did I drive her up to Hampstead.
While Ruth insisted he had, she refused to allow Bickford to use that in her defense. She wanted to protect Desmond because he'd supported her and her son over the last few months.
She accepted her fate, an eye for an eye, and that the crime would be, repaid.
She believed it was a fair exchange then to give her life for his life, like a certain equalizing of justice. And there was also the peace that came with knowing that torment was over.
I think almost, she thought she'd be reunited with David.
In a letter to David's mother, Ruth wrote, "I shall die loving your son, and you shall be content knowing that his death has been repaid."
Very few women commit murder, and so the idea that she was charged with murder would have fascinated the general public and the media at that time.
She insisted on going into court looking very well dressed, re-blonded her hair in prison. So she came across to the jury as quite a hard-bitten character.
Ruth only had a few defences available to her under 1955 law. Self-defense, insanity, proving her innocence, and provocation.
If David did something so terrible to you, it caused you to temporarily lose control, that could be a defense.
Provocation caused by David's increasing violence and her subsequent miscarriage seemed to be her best option, but the odds weren't great.
The law then was that in order to plead provocation, you had to show that the act that provoked you came immediately before your action. And that wasn't the case in Ruth Ellis. The actions had accumulated over many months.
The trial judge was Cecil Havers, whose actor grandson Nigel would subsequently play him in the drama about the case.
I have very fond memories of my grandfather. I adored him, really. He was a kind-hearted man, and I do know that he had great sympathy for Ruth.
It was a commonplace for people to say, well, you know, she must have had it coming to her, he must have been pushed to the edge. The assumptions always were that women had brought things onto their own heads. Her leading counsel was a man called Melford Stevenson. He wouldn't have understood what a woman might be feeling with this kind of level of rejection. The violence that displayed that rejection, the idea that she was being told that she was really a trollop and that she was of no value, the way in which she was so physically hurt that she loses her pregnancy.
Ruth's fate was sealed by prosecution barrister Christmas Humphrey's cross-examination.
Mrs. Ellis, when you fired that revolver at close range into the body of David Blakely, what did you intend to do?
Her answer was, it is obvious, I intended to kill him. She said on every occasion, no, I intended to kill him. And the more you say that, I'm afraid, the more the jury will convict you of murder.
In John Bickford's discussions of Ruth Ellis, he said, of course, the facts were totally against us. We had no real hope of securing an acquittal for her.
He tried desperately hard to make her say in front of the jury that she didn't intend to kill the man. She was just driven to shoot him because of provocation. Sadly, she refused.
In the end, the defense failed to convince the court that Ruth had been provoked, as defined by the laws of the time.
The whole trial was a shambles. Her defence was pitiful.
The trial lasted 2 days. It really took no time at all for the jury to decide on their verdict.
On June the 21st, Ruth Ellis was found guilty of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to death in accordance with the law.
As Ruth waited in Holloway Prison's condemned cell, a public campaign began to have her sentence commuted.
During those 3 weeks, while public controversy mounted, one man had a terrible decision to make. Home Secretary William Lloyd George. He had to decide whether or not to write the grim words, "The law must take its course."
I know it upset my grandfather enormously. He wrote a letter to the Home Secretary expressing she did not deserve to be hanged. Simple as that.
Others wrote to Home Secretary Gwilym Lloyd George, pleading him to show mercy, while 50,000 people from around the world signed a petition asking for clemency.
People had realised that this young woman with 2 young children who was just trying to make her way in the world, who was let down by so many men. I think there was a sense of everyone realising that it was slightly inhumane.
Despite public pressure, Lloyd George refused to grant Ruth a reprieve.
I remember looking at the little small Judas hole in the door, and she was sat down at a table with 2 wardresses at each side of her.
She tried to save herself at the 11th hour. She knew a reprieve wasn't going to happen. She realised that Andy wasn't going to be looked after by Desmond, so she needed to be there to look after Andy.
Ruth sacked her solicitor, John Bickford, accusing him of colluding with Desmond, and replaces him with Victor Mishcon, her former divorce solicitor.
He wanted her to get clemency so that she would serve a life imprisonment but not be hanged.
Why has she fired you?
I've been carrying a bomb in my briefcase and I didn't have the guts to detonate it.
He looked at me and said, "Try and get her to tell you who gave her the gun."
Mishcon tells Ruth to give a new statement about where she got the gun, and to tell the truth.
Didn't she owe it to her son? That he should know the truth?
Ruth tells Mishcon that Desmond loaded and oiled the gun before he drove her to Hampstead.
She said, I haven't said any of this before, and she used the word I remember so well, it would have been traitorous. She was facing what she did. Why bring somebody else punishment when it wasn't necessary?
I need the permanent Under Secretary of State.
He's at Ascot.
Well, get him bloody back from Ascot.
What message should I give?
Tell him Ruth Ellis isn't going to hang tomorrow.
Scotland Yard detectives are tasked to find Desmond and question him about the gun.
I think that a jury knowing that someone had shown her how to use a gun had helped her in that way. I think that Cousins might have ended up being in the dock as an accessory as well. And once you have that, then you start opening up the context. I'm not sure that it would have led to an acquittal, but I think it probably would have led to clemency. And that's the important thing.
Victor Mishcon gets a call. Desmond can't be found. Ruth's last hope is gone.
For the hundreds who waited at Holloway Jail on execution morning, and for the millions who stayed away, 3 questions remain. Should a woman hang? Should anyone hang at all? Or should there be degrees of murder?
Ruth wakes up, writes her final letters, and eats her last breakfast. Then Holloway's governor receives a call, reportedly from the Home Office, suggesting a last-minute reprieve for Ruth.
1 minute too, Mum.
Can't make her wait. It's torture. I mean, it's got to be a hoax.
The call was a hoax. The execution could carry on.
Follow me.
Pierpoint steps up to the gallows.
She came to me as though she was just walking the other way, walked right to me.
And as soon as she hears his feet stop moving, she then probably knows that the next sound she'll hear is some form of lever. Lever to death. It's quite a horrible kind of thought.
Don't worry, lass. I won't hurt you.
I can't begin to imagine what was going on in her head. She maintained her composure, though, wrote really right up until the very end.
She never spoke to me. I see her now, just flicked her eyes and she just pucked her lips so she was trying to smile, She's a brave woman.
Georgina was only 3 years old, and Andre was just 10 when their mother was executed.
My mum was a larger-than-life character, very similar to Ruth in some ways, with the peroxide blonde hair. She could turn a room immediately. She could turn a man very quickly, but she was ultimately very fun and bubbly. She found the desire to move to London as well, to also chase the bright lights. Wanted to get onto films, to be a singer.
I had a group of girlfriends around sort of the age of 13, 14. They would sit next to me in class and draw the hangman game and then sort of pass the paper towards me. It was, very hard. Mum was so prolific. She almost created this sort of media circus around Ruth's name. And I just didn't want to be a part of that.
I lost my mother when I was around 11 years old, and I was always trying to understand, what drove her, what made her the woman she was, what was she seeking, which was ultimately her identity.
Georgina was 8 when she first learned the truth about her mother's death.
I discovered the cuttings, and then the story was all in front of me. So I realised I saw the picture of her and remembered her as a small child.
Georgina passed away in 2001 at the age of 50 after a long battle with cancer.
The ripple effect has affected all of us. It's been a heavy burden. It's almost felt like I've been swimming in wet clothes. I spent sort of 40-something years avoiding the subject, not talking about it.
The controversy around Ruth's execution led to major changes in law. In 1957, the defence of diminished responsibility was established, a defence that could have prevented Ruth's execution.
Her death really gave the campaign for abolition to stop execution. It gave it its emotional spur. She was very young. She was in her 20s still. But unfortunately, she fell in love with David, and I think she did die loving him.
It's very, very sad, and the 2 lives that didn't make it to 30, and one of them didn't deserve it, and the other shouldn't have done it. What her grandchildren and family have gone through, I can certainly appreciate and understand that side of the tragedy.
She is a murderer, but she didn't deserve to be taken from the world in the way that she was. And equally, I have huge sympathy for David Blakely's family. He was a young man. He had the world ahead of him. He equally didn't deserve to die, which is why ultimately, the whole story is sadness.
Ruth was a trailblazer in life. She was a trailblazer in death. Ultimately, this case triggered major judicial reform in the UK. She didn't die in vain, and I take some comfort from that.
And if you or anyone you know has been affected by issues raised in this programme, you can visit itv.com/advice for support information. Next, the ITV News at 10.
A woman in a little English village walking her dog. These were circumstances which people would think were nightmarish.
It broke a family. It caused the most horrendous shockwaves to a community.
You could sense that a village like this wasn't used to crime of that degree.
There was no possibility that he would be tried again for that offence.
I think it gave him this powerful edge that he used to terrorise people. His behaviour was vile.
This was a historic ruling in terms of double jeopardy.
It was legally groundbreaking.
It was high stakes. This was the first in the country.
He clearly thought he'd effectively got away with it.
Ascot under Wychwood, a pretty picture postcard village that's home to just 500 residents. This peaceful, rural parish lies in the Evenlode Valley in Oxfordshire.
Ascot under Wychwood is a small village. Lots of villagers will have been here for many, many years. There will be families that have had descendants that have grown up in the village, and people know each other, the people look out for one another. It really is a tight-knit community where people generally know what's going on.
If you drove through the village, you'd say, oh, this is a really nice place to live, very idyllic, nice people, and a place where you perhaps also feel quite safe.
In this idyllic Oxfordshire village lives mum of two, Vicky Thompson.
Vicky was an absolutely delightful mum, wife, and, loved her family, great family unit. People that came into contact with her, equally found her delightful. She was a lovely, kind lady.
Vicky was a key part of the village community, as many people were. People would have known her in the village, and clearly living a nice, quiet life in the Oxfordshire countryside.
She's often seen out walking her beloved dog, Daisy.
She loved the fact that she could just, go to her front door, and within moments she'd be surrounded by fields, with a dog and the children. So, for her, I think it was a perfect place for her to bring up her family.
But Vicky's perfect idyll is about to change. Vicky had just celebrated her 9th wedding anniversary with her husband in the village pub where she worked. So on their Saturday, they take it easy, relaxing in the garden.
It was a pleasant day, the weather was beautiful, so it was a typical, idyllic weekend, really, that, that's what families sort of strive for.
In the afternoon, Vicky decides to take collie Daisy out for a walk.
It would have been about 4:45, 4 o'clock when she set off at a regular time down the same country lane, across a little bridge over the river that ran through the village, to walk Daisy down to Shipton Lane, it was called, and to come back.
It's typical of a village lane in this sort of area, perfect for walking the dog, and I'd imagine it was a well-worn route for Vicky and many other dog walkers in the area.
But today, Vicky's dog Daisy does something quite unexpected.
The first that anyone was aware that something was wrong was when Daisy came back.
And then, unfortunately, when the dog returned without her, that's when alarm bells started to ring.
As time goes by, with no news from Vicky, concern starts to set in.
Vicky's husband went out, started looking, spoke to neighbours, spoke to friends, and then, you almost naturally go into a sort of second phase of now starting to do a bit of a search, which is exactly what happened. So it sort of morphed into more of a search and thinking something's not quite right.
Vicky's husband assembles a small search team of family, friends and neighbours. They retrace her steps on her regular walk down Shipton Lane in the desperate hope of finding her.
One of those who were looking for her did notice some bloodstains on the surface of the path, but they thought that they were the blood of a sheep or something of that kind. They didn't think much of it at that time, so they went back to the village, and it was only when she still didn't return and they went back again that they looked at the bloodstain more carefully and came to realise that it was quite fresh, that beneath the congealed surface it seemed still to be wet. But much more importantly, nearby they then found some broken pieces of jewellery which were very quickly identified as hers. And that then became a source of real alarm, and I think it was that discovery which prompted the first call to the police.
Finding that jewellery, all that did was, I think, heighten the sense of nervousness within those that were looking for Vicky at the time.
As police make their way to the scene, the frantic hunt continues for Vicky. Her husband and neighbours are terrified she's clearly come to some harm. They make their way further down the lane.
This is Shipton Lane. We've got the lane itself, and then to the right you can see the train track. They must have really panicked and must have been desperate in time to find her, and it wouldn't have taken them too long once they'd realised that she was no longer on the path to scour the local area.
3 hours after Vicky went missing, they spot something sinister.
They noticed a gap in the hedge that ran alongside the lane where the bloodstaining and the jewellery had been found. And when they went over to the gap, which led into a nearby agricultural field that was bordered by the embankment of the railway line, they could see something in the distance that looked out of place, and they made their way across the field.
And they would have found her in a bad way here.
To their horror, Vicky's lying on the ground, with blood covering her face and head. When her husband tries to speak to her, she's drifting in and out of consciousness.
She was clearly in a very bad way. He spoke of her mumbling, and he tried to keep her talking and tried to keep her coherent. I believe she could name the name of their son.
Something ominous close by suggests this is foul play.
There was a stone there nearby. She'd obviously been attacked. She was bleeding, and to discover her like that is quite a harrowing experience, really. But Vicky was found, and she was found alive.
Her husband asked her, "Who did this to you?" But he just couldn't quite make out what she was saying. She was clearly in a very bad way and clearly very seriously injured.
She was certainly not able to say what had happened, still less to identify who was responsible.
With Vicky's life hanging in the balance, an air ambulance is sent in response to airlift her from the scene.
Time was of the essence to call in an air ambulance. That must have meant that she was clearly very gravely injured. And so she was airlifted to hospital.
She's flown straight to Oxford's John Radcliffe Hospital, which specialises in treating brain injuries.
She'd suffered multiple blows with a hard object to her head, which had caused skull fractures and serious brain damage.
As police secure the crime scene, their minds turn to the violent attacker on the loose.
Had Vicky been in a position to talk, there is no doubt that she'd have said exactly who'd attacked her, because of course everyone knew everybody. Sadly, she wasn't able to do that.
With no immediate suspect in the frame, the fear of an attacker living in their tight-knit community is the talk of the village.
People think that it could have been them, that it seemingly there's no targeting, that perhaps this was just a random attack on any dog walker. It could have been them. And I think that probably did strike home to the local community and perhaps the wider community in the county and beyond.
Within the community, there's no doubt that it was colossal. You know, that fear of crime can be just as powerful. And when you've got a small community that has been completely rocked by what unfolded, there's no doubt that it impacted that community severely.
Over the next 6 days in intensive care, Vicky Thompson fights for her life.
Her condition quite quickly deteriorated, and she died a few days later. And the cause of her death was blunt force head injury.
It's the news no one in the quiet village of Ascot under Wychwood wants to hear. Vicky's violent assault has now become murder.
As a reporter, I've covered many incidences of dog walkers being attacked, and they strike a chord with people. But when it develops into a murder, then I think it really does chill people locally.
In the quiet Oxfordshire village of Ascot under Wychwood, mum of two, Vicky Thompson, has been brutally attacked whilst out walking the dog, and dies 6 days later from her injuries. With Vicky's violent killer still at large, her community and the wider public are in shock.
The profile of the case, of course, was substantially enhanced by where it took place, because this was a late summer's afternoon, a woman in a little English village walking her dog. These were circumstances which, upon reading them, people would think were nightmarish. This was not something that was supposed to happen. And I think for that combination of reasons, it very quickly attracted a great deal of publicity.
So the pressure's on for Thames Valley Police to track down Vicky's brutal attacker.
This is the area where the incident occurred, and it is typical of an Oxfordshire village. We're on the edge of the Cotswolds, and it is a lane. You can clearly see why it was popular with dog walkers. It's the kind of lane that's quite overgrown. It's the kind of area that someone who didn't want to be seen could perhaps sort of conceal themselves and look as people walked along. We've got the railway line to my right here, the embankment, which is where Vicky was found.
Since the assault, police have been sweeping the area, looking for clues that could lead to the killer.
Looking at the lane, looking at the jewellery that was found, it was a view that perhaps where she was found wasn't necessarily where she was ultimately attacked at the time.
Scenes of crime officers retrace the killer's steps, back to the bloodstains on the path where they believe the attack happened.
As with all crime scenes, that becomes the most fundamental starting point of your investigation. Because what's left behind is what you need to try and secure.
At the attack scene, clumps of blood-stained hair are found on nearby rocks.
Vicky was clearly struck about the head with a blunt instrument, potentially a rock or a stone, and clearly suffered very serious head injuries. It then appears that she was moved somehow, perhaps dragged over towards the railway line.
Although the attack happened in broad daylight, investigators have got their work cut out finding any witnesses.
This is the Cotswold line. It is a pretty quiet line. There isn't a main line. There won't be too many trains coming past at any time of day. And so no one would have really witnessed it. There wouldn't be too much passing traffic.
Police are also trying to work out why Vicky was dumped by the railway line.
Potentially moving Vicky's body or moving her unconscious body towards the embankment might have concealed what had happened, that potentially it might have been made to look like an accident, but there was no real motive put forward for why she was moved closer towards this railway embankment.
But 200 metres from the scene of the attack, officers make an intriguing find.
In a hedge was found a plastic bag which contained 2 items of ladies' underwear that were discovered to have been contaminated with semen. This was obviously a hugely significant find, both because of what it was and because of where it took place.
Although the underwear does not belong to Vicky, it's sent off to the lab for DNA analysis. Meanwhile, police continue the hunt for potential witnesses to the attack. 2,500 people would eventually be interviewed in the surrounding area.
A huge amount of work was done. House to house was done. Lots of statements taken. Because unless you start to build up a picture, you can only do that by engaging with the community. And so it was a significant, large investigation, treated as a serious investigation right from the very outset.
But in the village, one name starts coming up on the doorstep. 20-year-old odd job man, Mark Weston.
There's those that, are mischievous and those that are perhaps, trouble. Mark Weston was trouble. Not mischievous, he was trouble. And the investigation identified Mark Weston as a key suspect, and they had every reason to do so.
And police are told Weston is often seen on the path leading towards the crime scene, Shipton Lane.
He used to go down there. This is a chap, we're very mad, he didn't have a day job. He hanged around. So this place was a sort of regular haunt. There was lots of witnesses that would place him on this lane, because it was a regular thing for him to do.
Through door-to-door inquiries, 4 separate villagers tell police they saw Weston heading towards Shipton Lane, just before the approximate time of Vicky's attack. The local post office clerk claims she saw him looking alarmed, covered in sweat, and running away from the village only an hour later.
Some witnesses had come forward and said that they'd seen him acting strangely. It became very clear, as a result of the inquiries that went on, that Weston became a suspect. So
police pay a visit to Mark Weston. On the morning morning of the murder, he claims he went fishing and shopping, but was at home all afternoon during the time of the attack. 3 days later, when police question him again, his story changes, and he says he was at home all day. 5 days later, it's a different story. Weston claims he actually left his house at 5 p.m, not long after the attack, to call on his neighbours who weren't in. But Weston's neighbours beg to differ. They say they had been at home at the time Weston said he'd visited and had never seen him. For police, something doesn't stack up.
There are conflicting reports about where he was. All this sort of stuff was coming in that conflicted with what Mark was saying. It would be right to look at him very carefully. But looking very carefully is one thing. Having the evidence to support an arrest is another.
But when scenes of crime officers search his garden 4 weeks after the murder, they find the charred remains of a sweatshirt or jacket that he's attempted to burn.
As the investigation went on, other evidence started becoming apparent about the burning of clothes, and so there's a few things that led the investigation to Mark Weston.
Today, police have arrested a 20-year-old man in the investigation into the murder of Vicky Thompson.
As the evidence builds, Mark Weston is arrested and taken in for questioning. He maintains his story, that he was at home at the time of Vicky's attack. Meanwhile, police search his house, seizing some of his clothing, including a pair of his boots. They are sent off for forensic analysis. The results come back to the senior investigating officer.
The SIO at the time asked the question, was there blood on this boot? The answer came back, no. You can't do any more with that. The question's been asked, and the answer was given.
Weston is released, and the police continue their inquiries. But soon, the lab has more news, and this time it could turn the case on its head. The lady's underwear found near the crime scene has a DNA result for the body fluids found on them. It matches Mark Weston.
That became a key piece of evidence. It linked Mark Weston to the scene, no question at all.
In Ascot-under-Wychwood, Oxfordshire, police have a prime suspect for the murder of mother of two, Vicky Thompson. DNA linked to Mark Weston is found in a bag of ladies' underwear close to the attack scene. With this new key evidence, police now believe they've established a motive.
He quite possibly was seen by Vicky performing a sex act and perhaps reacted angrily to Vicky, perhaps accosting him and asking him what's going on, and then things escalated from there.
I mean, would he really want the village to be aware that he was behaving like that? Which was perverse activity.
I think he was threatened with humiliation and possibly worse. And I think the initial violence that he used was in temper and spontaneous. Once things start to go wrong, they get worse. And I'm afraid I think that's what happened here.
As Weston is put under the spotlight, more evidence is uncovered, linking to the bag of underwear found near the attack scene.
During a search of a narrow watercourse that ran down the back of the gardens of the houses in the street where he lived was another plastic bag in which were found other items of ladies' underwear which had been placed there or an attempt had been made to conceal them after the day of the attack. He did not want items of ladies' underwear to be found in his home which would connect him to the scene, and so he had separately disposed of those so as to prevent that connection from being made.
although none of this underwear belongs to murder victim Vicky, police can now see Weston's trying to hide a sordid secret.
It was the underwear of women who lived in the village, and it had been taken from their washing lines. And he was using it for a sexual purpose. His reputation in the village from that day onwards would have been destroyed. I think there would have been an element of ridicule in it for him, and it might well be that he just couldn't bear the thought of that.
It seemed from the evidence that Mark Weston perhaps had a troubling relationship with women and perhaps fixated on some women locally. We will never know.
Today, a 20-year-old man has been charged with the murder of Vicky Thompson.
6 months after Vicky Thompson's brutal killing, Mark Weston is charged with her murder. Then, in November that same year, he finally faces trial at Oxford Crown Court. But before the case barely gets underway, the prosecution's dealt a serious blow.
I think the police and perhaps the Thompson family felt very aggrieved that the judge presiding over the trial ruled inadmissible some key evidence, and that was a bag found with 2 pieces of underwear containing DNA from Weston very near the scene. That was ruled inadmissible. The jury couldn't know about that.
With little other evidence proving Weston's inappropriate sexual behaviour, the judge believes this one piece of proof could unfairly sway the case.
The judge felt it just wasn't fair for Weston that he would get a fair trial if that was admitted. And I've got no doubt having that judge make that direction would have been hard to be accepted. But the law is there to protect everybody, whether you're a victim or an offender, to make sure, from an offender's perspective, that you get a fair trial.
But police have now lost their vital evidence linking Weston to the crime scene.
And so a key bit of evidence, a key bit of fact-finding from the police was ruled out at a stroke.
It is unfortunate that that wasn't admitted as evidence. It would have been crucial. It would have significantly helped Crown's case.
As the trial continues, the prosecution case never recovers.
There have always been discrepancies and inconsistencies in the accounts which he gave at the time about his movements, but none of that was sufficient to prove an opportunity for him to have been where she was in order for him to have carried out the attack. And in the absence of a piece of evidence which could clearly establish that, it was always going to be difficult.
Following a trial lasting 14 days, the jury retires to consider the case. To the court's surprise, they return in just 50 minutes. The verdict? Mark Weston is not guilty. It's a body blow for the police and Vicky's family.
An acquittal in 50 minutes or so is fairly rare in my experience, and so clearly the jury in that original trial just didn't feel there was the evidence there to convict Mark Weston.
An acquittal so quickly after retirement was interpreted as a declaration of innocence, a statement by the jury, not merely that it hadn't been proved that it was him, but that it very definitely wasn't him.
It is very disappointing when a jury does come back and return a verdict of not guilty, when you know and you strongly believe that that person is guilty.
The case was thrown out very quickly, and so the police and Thompson's family and friends clearly walked away from the Crown Court that day very disappointed indeed.
They made their decision at the time that had to be accepted.
Mark Weston even appears on local news to boast about his acquittal.
Cleared of murder, Mark Weston is this morning back with his family.
Well, I've done nothing wrong, but they still kept saying it was me, knowing it wasn't. But now they can come to realize they had the wrong person.
And to add salt to their wounds, Thames Valley Police comes under fire from the unlikeliest of places.
Following the acquittal, one of the jurors felt sufficiently strong about what they had observed during those proceedings to write directly to Mr. Weston, suggesting that he might sue the Thames Valley Police for a wrongful prosecution.
Although Weston secures legal aid to do this, his case runs out of steam. So he turns to other ideas of how to seek revenge.
There's a thought that you might quietly do just go back and just be perhaps under the radar. Weston was none of that. When he got acquitted, I think he had a sense of empowerment.
He acted with impunity after that. He moved back into the community, and he taunted the community perhaps in some ways, and literally harassed people who'd been involved in that original trial. He didn't try to fade away.
Barely a year later, Weston launches a campaign of harassment against the village bobby who helped investigate the case. Day and night, he makes up to 50 silent phone calls to the PC, his wife and their 2 daughters.
He terrorised the officer. And bearing in mind, that's how we policed. You know, we're in that community, we're part of the community, because you are a member of the village. And I've been there, and it's lovely. But the thought of them being terrorised, it's just harrowing.
After police put video surveillance on the village phone box and record Weston's phone calls, he's convicted for harassment. Weston is sentenced to a 2-year conditional discharge and a restraining order. So next, Weston moves on to another villager who also provided evidence in his murder case.
I believe he put some posters up around the village, and he made remarks about people being grass, and clearly he went on the offensive.
Weston shines lights into his neighbour's house and posts threatening notes through her door. Mark Weston is convicted of harassment once again. He's sentenced to 100 hours of community service.
This empowerment, I think, overwhelmed him. So he became very vexatious. I am permitted to do this because actually I've been acquitted. I think it gave him this powerful energy that he used to terrorise people. His behaviour was vile.
He was perhaps a little bit arrogant. He didn't feel that he was under any threat from being hauled back to court. The law at the time meant that he couldn't be retried for the same offence, and so he clearly thought he'd effectively got away with it.
But a change of law on the horizon would soon give the investigators new hope.
Why? Because we knew, without question, that Mark Weston killed Vicky.
Ascot under Wychwood, Oxfordshire. In spite of proof linking Mark Weston to the murder of villager Vicky Thompson, he's acquitted in court. And the so-called double jeopardy law means Weston will never face justice again, even if new evidence comes to light.
It was a horrific attack, and her family must have been deeply troubled by no one having been convicted of her murder.
But in 2003, there's fresh hope.
Parliament passed an act which abolished the common law rule of double jeopardy, permitting, in limited circumstances, the prosecution for a second time of the same individual for the same offence.
2 years later, on the 10th anniversary of Vicky's tragic murder, Thames Valley Police's cold case review team reopens the investigation, with then Detective Superintendent Barry Halliday leading the unit.
That was typically one of the cases that was immediately identified as needing to be reviewed.
That didn't mean it was easy for prosecutors to bring another case. It was, in fact, there was a very high bar for the prosecution to succeed. They'd also need compelling, fresh, new evidence. They knew that a murderer had walked free after that initial trial, and they just needed that one piece of evidence to get him, to nail him, to get their man.
The lightbulb moment for investigators comes from another high-profile case that hit the headlines 5 years earlier. The murder of Peckham schoolboy, Damilola Taylor.
The senior police officer was attending a lecture, and how, upon the first investigation of the death of that little boy, highly incriminating bloodstains had not been detected upon items of clothing being examined by scientists during the investigation, and how difficult it is sometimes to find them.
So detectives try and hunt down any of Weston's belongings that weren't returned to him following the first investigation. They're in luck. Weston's boots are found in one of the Force's exhibit stores. Could they contain that golden nugget of proof police desperately need?
There was no harm in sending those boots back in. Fresh pair of eyes, fresh forensic opportunities, and testing and examination, and just be sure that there was no forensics on those boots.
In the 10 years since the boots last saw the light of day, forensic techniques have massively evolved.
The changes in procedures for searching for blood would involve a change in the sorts of lights that we regularly use. We now use a fibre optic lamp, and that has a halogen bulb in it. Previously, people just used perhaps an overbench light with a tungsten bulb in it, and we know that that change in lighting is much better for looking for bloodstains. The other change is that we will more regularly use a low-power microscope to search an item for blood, whereas previously that wasn't routinely used.
So scientists put Mark Weston's boots under the microscope to see if the tiniest spot of blood had been missed the first time round. The fact that they are black proves to be the greatest challenge.
People think of bloodstains as being bright red. Well, they are when they're fresh, but they very quickly change their appearance. They darken.
The blood doesn't show up readily on a black surface. There are also lots of nooks and crannies, and it has a very intricate surface, so it's a difficult item to examine, and I think even a careful and diligent scientist could miss blood if they weren't examining it under optimum conditions.
But soon, forensic scientists hit the jackpot.
We found some blood staining on Mark Weston's boots, and DNA profiles were obtained from that blood, and those matched Vicky Thompson. That was really the significant moment in this case. It was the turning point.
It's the news the cold case team have been longing for.
The case was never closed, and to get a moment like that where you're told that all that hard work that your team has ploughed into, and actually you get fundamental evidence, is euphoric.
They'd finally found that smoking gun, that real piece of evidence that they needed to seal the conviction that they thought they should have sealed years earlier.
After 4 years spent rebuilding their case, police swoop in to re-arrest Mark Weston.
He was absolutely, frankly furious. He was adamant, arrogant, can't believe this is happening to me again. That sort of behaviour. So all the evidence was presented to him, including the overwhelming evidence of the blood of Vicky on his own boots. Absolutely no response from him at all, accepting any responsibility or liability for Vicky's death. A complete and utter denial.
But the police aren't home and dry with a prosecution yet. Next, they have to convince a court of appeal. And these are uncharted waters. It's one of the first times a double jeopardy case has been heard before the court.
Our case was made very strongly, and then there is that huge sense of nervousness whilst you're waiting for the decision.
After weeks of waiting, police and prosecutors finally get news.
Given how compelling the evidence was, the Court of Appeal made the decision that it was in the interest of justice for Mr. Weston to be tried again, and his acquittal was quashed.
That was agonising, waiting. But the news came back. You are elated.
It was a great moment when we heard that the Court of Appeal had overturned the acquittal. This was a historic ruling in terms of double jeopardy and introducing new scientific evidence.
5 months later, Weston finally hears the murder case against him for a second time.
There was a real sense that Thames Valley Police had been given a second chance here, and so there was a sense of tension that the police were gambling in a sense that this was their final throw of the dice.
It was high stakes. The tension was immense, and Weston continued to be as arrogant as ever.
But this time, the discovery of underwear near the crime scene linked to Weston is allowed to be heard in court. It's clear even he can't explain away the overwhelming evidence against him.
There wasn't going to be much anybody could do about the fact that her blood was found on his boots. The scientific evidence this time round was simply unanswerable.
Perhaps he knew that his time was finally up and that last piece of evidence was crucial and he couldn't fight this any longer.
But Weston's fate is once again in the hands of the jury as they retire to consider their verdict.
The trial was absolutely, extremely intense. That wait was probably the most sensitive, nervous time I've ever experienced.
The jury delivered a verdict. Mark Weston is finally found guilty of Vicky Thompson's murder. 15 years after her death, the judge jails him for a minimum of 13 years.
This arrogant man, this man who sort of taunted those who tried to bring him to justice, was finally behind bars.
It's a relief to the husband who comforted his dying wife after Weston's vicious attack.
It doesn't bring back his wife, and nothing can, of course, but it was the verdict they wanted.
It was big, it was significant, but let's not lose sight of the real fact here. The real fact here is, Vicky lost her life. She shouldn't have done. It broke a family. It caused the most horrendous shockwaves to a community. And this individual evaded capture for all those years.
And the case will forever be etched in the memory of the quiet Oxfordshire village of Ascot under Wychwood.
It was clearly a case that had a big impact locally and perhaps continues to do. People haven't forgotten what's happened, and so that case does still live long in the memory locally.
And what of Mark Weston himself?
There's no remorse, there's no acceptance. This was a miscarriage of justice. Well, that was rich. A miscarriage of justice occurred years ago. Weston committed that murder, and Vicky's life was taken away by that monster, nobody else.